Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these little devices here, these phones. I wonder if you're like me and you can't help but pick them up when you get a notification or you sense that you're going to get one. And there's that anticipation that kind of builds up. And so we can become kind of preoccupied with that. And that's just one aspect of how technology has kind of changed our lives and the way we interact with the world and communicate, which kind of leads me into my topic today, which is screen addiction, something that is coming to more prevalence. People are talking more about it. And so what I wanted to do today was just kind of talk a little bit about that, talk about some of the pitfalls that can come with spending too much time online, what that kind of looks like, and then maybe some strategies that we can look at, especially in God's word, that can help us to make sure that as we use these devices, that we're not doing so in such a way that dishonors God and dishonors our relationships with others, right? Because if we're heads down in our phone, then we're not necessarily heads up and connecting with the people around us that we love. And I thought a good way to start was with just a couple of tidbits from studies that I've looked at that kind of give an idea of just how much time we're spending on our phones. For instance, Nielsen Media in 2018 performed a study and determined that the average American spends about 9 hours a day looking at screens. That is not including the time they spend looking at them for school and work-related activities. So you can see that if you look at it broadly, we are very much tied to our screens. It's changing the way we interact with the world. Another study, there's a professor from the California State University, and he actually created an app, and he installed it on all of his students' phones so that he could track how often they were picking up, unlocking their phones, looking at their phones, and then relocking them. And he said just over the course of the time that they were with him, during a typical day, it was about 220 minutes worth of time that they were sort of captivated by their phone. One of the most common uses of the phone, and one of the things that can lead to screen addiction is social media and the prevalence of that and how that's sort of taking over our lives. Again, going back to communication and how we talk to each other. For instance, another study done by Nielsen Media showed in 2016 that the average person spent about 90 minutes looking at social media and participating in social media. In 2018, it jumped to 120 minutes. And then in 2020, it jumped again to 3 hours. So you see this pattern growing. You see the arc of it and how consuming this can be and how that can lead to addiction. You know, they've even developed terms now that we can associate with it, like FOMO, fear of missing out, right? Like I got to look at my phone, I got to see what's coming up. Net compulsion, gaming addiction, all these things tied towards looking at our phones, being involved in them. And that made me think a little bit more about the things we do while we're not on our phones, more specifically spiritual things like going to church and attending a service. And we give 30 to 40 minutes of our time to a sermon. But then you look back over the rest of the week, and all that time that we're spending looking at these other things. And I wonder how much of what God's trying to teach us in those moments of church and Bible study, they're getting lost in the weeds of this communication tool that we're holding that's always near us. And so it's a strategy that we can use to evaluate how we're using that time and to ask ourselves the question, is this God honoring? Is to use an acronym that I came up with that's based around Philippians 4:8, right? Think about these things. And, you know, is it true? Is it noble? Is it pure? Is it righteous? And is it worthy of praise? So if we can ask ourselves those questions, right, if you take the first letter of each of those and just kind of memorize them, and we apply that to what we're looking at online, how we're spending that time, not necessarily that we want to check every box every time, but that we get ourselves into a mindset where we're evaluating how we're using that time. And again, is it honoring God? Is it honoring the relationships around us? And so I challenge each of us to just kind of evaluate that, look at that, and then ultimately ask the question, is the technology serving us or are we serving the technology? Thank you.